Our first speaker is Joe Shaw presenting a speech titled Raw Stories. Joe is a two-time TEDx speaker and a two-time semifinalist in the Toastmasters International World Championship of Public Speaking. He's a best-selling author of short fiction, comic book writer, and an author of several cartoon series that almost made it on TV. Please welcome Joe Shaw.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for the kind words, and thank you to Mike for those kind words, and everybody else for being here today, right at the start of the new year after the holidays. I hope everybody's holidays went well. For me, we had a lot of fun. We have 5 kids at home with us, and at the end of the day, once the chaos has died down, my wife and I would sit down to watch the Hallmark Christmas movies on television. Has anybody else done that before? Raise your hand. A couple of you see it. I'd like to share a little confession. I actually liked them this year. Now, I usually don't. In past years, I would make fun of them all the time. I even pitched a series of action Christmas movies to my wife one year. We put it on TNT, where you got a young man and a young woman who come together with a grizzled war veteran, 2 high school dropouts, and a Russian munitions expert with an unhealthy obsession with bicycles to fight off a horde of werewolves and zombies to save the town in time for Christmas. My wife was not amused by this approach. So this year I said, I'm going to keep it calm. I'm just going to watch the movies. And I realized they might be cheesy, they might be predictable, but they're still good. I mean, the acting isn't always great, but from a storytelling standpoint, they're much better than a lot of the stuff that's out there right now. And I think that's because they follow a framework that I've been using for decades to help guide seemingly random stories into something coherent and engaging. It's a framework I think you can use in your writing, your speaking, and it can help you do your job in your professional world and also in your personal life. It's called the story circle. Now, you might look at this story circle here and say, Joe, that looks like it was drawn by an 8-year-old with crayons or maybe on MS Paint. And if that's what you're thinking, you're right, that's what it was, because I'm a horrible graphic designer, so I got one of my kids to help me out. So if you see some weirdness in there, that's what it is. What is the story circle? Well, it's a simple plot structure developed by a lot of different people. Dan Harmon, who's the creator of the cartoon series Rick and Morty and also the TV show Community. It also pulls heavily from Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey and Robert McKee's book Story. So go ahead and read those if you have time. If you want way too much information about storytelling, those are 2 books you should look at. It also pulls a little bit from some frameworks that the South Park creators have included in their development. And it helps you refine your stories. It gives you a high-level approach to the way you structure the stories you build. And it's also inherently character-driven. So you can have meaningful character arcs that make the story stick in your audience's mind, in your reader's mind. So we walk through several different phases of the story in these pie pieces that you see here to drive the story that we're going. So let's walk through each of those and see what we have. First step is called you. And this is where you meet the character or group of characters. It could be you, it could be some other character or a friend of yours, whoever the main protagonist is or group of protagonists, living their normal, comfortable lives. This is the way their lives have been for as long as you can remember. We learn to relate to these main characters here. So we learn a little bit about who they are. And here there's a little bit of conflict going on in their lives, and that kind of starts the story in motion. So it's not necessarily the big conflict, but it's something that shows what's going on in their lives and what might lead to the story that's coming on. And the conflict here usually foreshadows some of the characters' needs later on. So, wow, there's a bug in my room. Excuse me. So I thought we could take the approach of looking at both sides of the stories I was mentioning earlier. We can look at a potential Christmas movie. We can also look at an action movie, Star Wars, and see how they lay out in these different phases. So for Star Wars, this is where you would see Luke on Tatooine with Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru learning how to be a moisture farmer. He goes out in the day, does his job, comes back, meets with his family. You also start to see him looking off in the distance a lot at the suns and talking about wanting to join the rebellion. So you know there's something going on in him, but you're not sure about what it is. Excuse me. In our Christmas movie, the young woman, the protagonist in our Christmas movie, is living a happy life in the big city as a marketing exec. She's trying to get promoted to a partner in the firm, but she's kind of lonely. She doesn't have a lot of really close friends. All right, let's move on to the second phase. It's called need. Here, we learn what's missing from the character's life and how they think they might resolve it. So there are two levels you want to look at here. First, you have what the character wants, and then beneath that, a deeper need that is missing from their lives. So if we were to look at our different stories we're talking about, in Star Wars, Luke is staring off into the sun, like I said, but he complains about his friends who go join the rebellion, and his aunt and uncle won't let him. What he thinks he wants is to go join the rebellion and have adventure in his life. But we all know that there's a deeper need for him later on in the movie. In the Christmas movie, the young woman thinks she wants to be promoted to partner in her marketing firm, and that will make her feel like her life is fulfilled. Excuse me, man, hold on a second. But as we all know, with these Christmas movies on Hallmark, other things come in and take place to make her life fulfilled in a different way. Near the end of this session, something happens that moves them into action. Usually, if you were to follow the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell, it would say it's an inciting incident. Something changes in their life to throw them outside of their comfort zone. So for the Christmas movie, a woman maybe gets the call that her father at her hometown is sick and she needs to return to her small town in New Hampshire right around Christmas time. In Star Wars, C-3PO and R2-D2 crash into Luke's planet with a message from a mysterious character, but they run into Luke instead, and then things start to happen. So that inciting incident gives the main character a choice. Am I going to stay where I am and continue living my comfortable life? Or am I going to step across this threshold into action and go to the next phase, go? And this is where the character steps out into a brand new world. The marketing executive leaves New York to go home and finds out that life is completely different than she remembers it. The things that she does now don't necessarily work for her hometown the way she used to be. For Luke, he meets up with the old man, the smuggler, and the walking carpet to take adventure off into space, and he's never been there. Where did I go here? So the character decides to go out into the world and start looking for that thing they think they want. Luke wants adventure. The woman wants to work toward progressing her career, and they cross into action. But what they find when they cross into action is that the world becomes chaotic, and they have to change who they are in order to adapt to it. So this causes conflict in their lives. You can start seeing them trying to learn new skills, trying to learn new ways of acting, but they also have confusion as well. They don't understand how to be in this world. They're kind of a fish out of water. And that moves them into the next phase, search. Their world is completely in chaos, and they have to make another choice to take a step into, am I going to continue interacting with this chaos the way I've lived my entire life up until now? Or am I going to adapt and change to this discomfort? So a lot of times you'll see the character begin to adapt to the chaos around them, and they start seeing they have opportunities to attain that thing they want. In our Christmas movie, maybe the woman interacts with people in her old town and nobody cares that she's a high-priced executive for a marketing firm. She meets with her dad, and her interactions seem less about the fact that he's struggling with being sick and more about how she's disconnected from life. But then she gets a call from her work saying, hey, we're looking to bring you on as an executive in the firm. You just got to meet with us, and we'll make that happen. For Star Wars, Luke flies off with the old man, and he starts to learn the ways of the Force and what his real history is, but he's not very good at it. And Han Solo makes fun of him the whole time, which I love that. Han Solo is my favorite character. So he's searching for something, or they're searching for the things that they want, and then they come across the next step, which is finding. They find the things they want. And now they've decided, I'm going to take action on this thing that I want. I'm going to start to change who I was and accept that this new life, this new way of being, is who I am as a person now. So instead of having those old beliefs where Luke was a moisture farmer, he now decides his life is going to have adventure and he's going to be part of the rebellion. Instead of pursuing this comfortable life that she had, the woman decides she's going to step into becoming an executive and step into having some relationships that she's interested in. Until now, they've been using these old habits, but here they finally get what they want, and they feel like their life has been fulfilled. So this for them might seem like the high point in their lives. However, the next step is once they take what they want, they realize there's a steep price to pay for it. You learn that what they thought they wanted back in section 2 is not what they wanted. It's not what they needed in their life. So, and that price can be heavy. They start to see how what they wanted in their life doesn't really match up with the need that they have in their life that was causing them to be unsettled at the beginning. So for Luke in Star Wars, he wants to have a life of adventure. He's off having adventure on the Death Star, but then he watches Darth Vader kill Obi-Wan, and now his life is completely chaotic and he doesn't know what to do. For the woman, she talks to her executive office, has to fly back for an interview with her executive office, and while she's gone, her father passes away, and she realizes that taking that thing that she wanted caused her to miss that final connection with her father. It's a heavy price that you have to pay. So then they're faced with a decision in the next phase, and that is return. The character moves from chaos back into order. They finally decide how they're going to be as a new person. Are they going to revert back to their old way of being or stay how they are? The character returns into a more of a familiarity role, but they have new skills, abilities, and beliefs, and they put these skills, abilities, and beliefs in support of that need. In our Christmas story, our young woman decides that what she really needs is connection with other people. So she makes the decision to stay in her hometown and start her own marketing business while also pursuing a relationship with a carpenter who has a never-ending wardrobe full of plaid that she met when she went back home. In Star Wars, Luke realizes he's way more powerful than he thought, and fighting against the evil empire is more important than adventure and flying off with friends. There's a deeper need that they have to fulfill, and they've decided we're going to live in that instead of the want that we had. And that drives into the final stage of change. In this stage, the character has changed and moves into a new reality on their own terms. They face a future it's different from what they had thought it would be in the past, but they return with these new skills and abilities, and that future is defined by the choice they've made. In this stage, you could see Luke going on to pursue becoming a Jedi, going on to pursue fighting the Empire instead of just having adventure with the rebellion. In this stage, you see the young woman pursuing a relationship with this man that she met, but also pursuing a different kind of business where she's in charge and not following what she thought was her tradition. And that's the basis of the story. You see a character that has started off at one point under the you stage, having a different set of beliefs, a different set of wants and desires. And as they go into chaos, into action, they learn to change. They learn the price of some of the choices that they have to make. They either overcome that choice or they don't, and then they become changed as a result. This could be a positive or a negative story. If you start finding out what your want is, and then you continue to pursue that want instead of that deeper need, you can become a villain. The story can end on a negative turn. You see a lot of movies like that, like The Godfather, for example. He makes poor choices, and at the end, he becomes the villain that he never wanted to be at the beginning. That's a basis of a, excuse me. I lost my place here. That's the basis of the story circle, these different phases that you walk through. But there are a few things I wanted to walk through that also deepen how this can structure your stories as you're building them as well. So the next thing would be thresholds. If you look at the horizontal line and the vertical line, those are two thresholds that the character crosses throughout their story. So in the horizontal line right there, you see it's a cross between order and chaos. The character makes a decision based on their needs and their wants to move their life out of the comfort zone into chaos. And then it's the chaos that changes them. Stories are only as interesting as the chaos that changes the characters to begin with. If you have a character that starts off bland and continues to be bland, and then just makes choices to be bland, and then ends up bland, it's really boring. The only people that do that really well is maybe Seinfeld, and that's one of a kind. Most stories have to go through that changing mechanism in order to change a character. On the vertical line, you see a character moving from the old way of being into their new way of being. They've sought this thing that they think they want. They've decided to make a choice about it, and now they have to live a different way. They've changed who they are as a person. They've either grown or shrunk depending on their choices, and they have a completely new way of being, and then how they respond to the world around them is dependent on that new way. So when you're thinking about how a character changes, you can look at the mechanism of change, which is the horizontal line being the chaos versus order, and the way that they change in the vertical line from the old way to the new way. Another thing to look at is mirroring. A lot of times it's nice to have callbacks and foreshadowing within your story, and you can see that as you're looking through this, we have these pieces mirror the pie pieces across from them. For example, you and find are mirrors of each other. You, where we meet the character, we see that the character's one is often so tied to their identity that when they finally get that in find, it feels like they're finding themselves until they realize there's a true need beneath that, and that can become very grand in the way that they deal with life. The next thing you have need, mirroring, take. On the one hand, we have here's what I want on the needs side, and on the other side, we have here's what I have to pay to get it. You see the consequence of going after that shallow want. You see the consequence of not really seeking to become a better person, and that can affect how that change takes place in the character toward the end. For go and return, go is where the character plunges into chaos, and return is where they come back from a changed person. You don't get that return phase. You don't get that final end of the story if you don't have a character going to take action. So the end in the return is where the character is no longer living in chaos, and your character knows what to do in this stage, and they only know what to do because of what the actions they took in the go stage. And then finally, search, mirrors, changed. Search is where the character begins looking to fulfill both the needs and the wants that they have, and changed is the result of that search, whether they searched and made good actions or searched and made poor choices. That's how they're changed in the end. So you can see how you can do foreshadowing of the choices they make at the end based on some of these at the beginning. It's a great way to tie a thread through all the different aspects of your story. The last piece I want to look at, I put up here, originally called it threading determinism, and my fifth grade son went, what? And I said, okay, let's change it. We'll call it transitions. How do we handle transitions from stage to stage? I was talking to my fifth grade son as we were working on this. He said, he's telling me about his day. And he said, he'd come home from school and he just starts blurting out everything that happened. He said, first I went to math class, we did division, and Julie said that she could be better at me, but I said, no, I'm not, and I proved her wrong. And then I went to science, and we did this thing where we had to drop an egg from really high, and I was supposed to build this box that would stop it from breaking, but mine broke. And then I went to lunch, and then I went to English, and then I went to recess, and then. A lot of stories that we see are just random events that happen that really aren't tied together. And they can be interesting things that happen. They're great things that could be part of a story, but if there's nothing that ties one to the other, it's really chaotic for the reader or the audience as you're telling your story. So the way to fix this, the way to bring that chaos down and transition things correctly between these stages is two simple words. When you have a scene or an action, if you find yourself saying, and then in between it, that's not the way it should be. You should use the words but or therefore. Every time there's an action, you should say, this happened, but this happened. Luke had a common life, but he wanted to be more adventurous. This woman had a great job, but she wanted something more. Therefore, Luke decides he's going to take action when he's presented with the opportunity to have a life of adventure. Therefore, when the woman is offered that position with her company, she decides, I'm going to take that because it's what I want. And from there on, you would say, but Luke watches Obi-Wan get killed, but this woman misses her father passing away and misses the last moments of his life. Therefore, their next actions happen. You can have your list of actions and story beats in your story, but if you can't say but or therefore between those two spaces, you've got some fixing to do. And these lend themselves to neatly into the story circle as well. You can see as you go through the first phase, we find out who the character is, then we complicate it by asking, but this happens, and it may provide some depth. And then because of that complication, therefore, something else happens. it provides a level of determinism between each step. You can't just have random actions. You have to have something that happened because something else happened. And because you're looking at either a but or therefore between each of your scenes, it's a lot easier to find a conflict in some of these areas. Up here at the top in the ordered part of life, before you hit chaos, conflict is a hard thing to bring in. You can have it in, but sometimes it's difficult to have. You can also bring in more of a moral or principled approach to undercurrent to your story in the chaotic scene if you have a but and therefore in the way the actions work, because then the character is tied to things that makes logical sense. And then, of course, if you let your kid decide they're going to design part of your presentation, they look at this and they say, we got to make some jokes about it. So that's what my kids did. There you go. Professionalism, that's how I am. So as we're going through this presentation, and I went through a lot faster than I expected to, the story circle provides meaning and depth to the way you're working on your story. You can find those character arcs. You can find reasons for those character arcs. You can find real emotional and logical reasons that characters make the choices they make. And then if you use the structure, you can define what the next steps will be that makes sense to you and makes sense to your audience. It also guides the direction to a satisfying conclusion. The character doesn't just run off and do whatever. There are things that have to happen based on the choices they've made. And it either turns out well or it doesn't turn out well, but it can be satisfying either way. And then it mirrors actions to consequences. You can have those mirrors across the different pie pieces throughout the circle that show, because I made a choice up here, this has to happen down here. Because I made a choice here, this has to happen over here. And you can foreshadow it and call back to it later on. And that's a very satisfying approach. And then, of course, as my kids did, it includes monkey butts. So there we go. So that's the story circle. That's what we have. Here's the final page if you want to look at it, if you want to keep in touch with me. Here's ways to contact me at my website, my email. I've done some TEDx's and I've also done some writing. So take a look at it there. If you want to take a look at this presentation, I have a link to it. I'll put it in the chat. You can download it as well. But other than that, I'd love to take a few moments for some questions and answer if anybody has any.
Thanks, Joe. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I actually was wondering, how much time do you normally spend when you're writing speeches on the introduction, the setup, like of the character?
Well, this is another approach to writing. There are two major approaches that people have. They'll usually have, it's called a pantser or a plotter. A pantser is somebody who kind of goes by the seat of their pants. It says, oh, wouldn't it be fun if we had a story about a guy who was got into a fight with somebody at a grocery store? And then you just kind of write and kind of follow that. And that's the rough draft. So I'm that kind of person. I just jump in and I start writing action. And then I go back and I go, does this make sense to what I've done here? Maybe you got to move this around a little bit. So I don't set up a lot. I usually just jump in and then go back and fix it in editing. A plotter is somebody who will say, okay, let me lay out this story circle, or let me lay out an outline, and let me lay out the buts and the therefores. Let me define what each scene is going to be. And then I know I got to have this much in setup. So I'll start writing this piece, and then I'll do this piece, and then I'll do this piece. It's two different ways of getting into the same thing. I've tried that, and I want to punch myself in the face if I do that, because I just can't. I can't handle that. But other people, that has their bread and butter. My wife has to have an outline before she starts writing something, or she can't do it. So, it's different pieces. I don't spend a lot of time in setup. I usually write what's foremost in my mind, and then I go back and ask myself questions. I say, does this make sense? Why did you include monkey butts in the presentation? It's kind of stupid, but it's kind of late to move it now. So there it is.
And you said you'll have a link with to this presentation as well, to the slides?
Yeah, I can put it in the chat. I got it here.
And Joe, I'm not sure if you can see, there's a question from Ming, and I can read it unless Ming wants to ask the question. I'll read it. Joe, please, would you comment on humor in storytelling? And thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you very much. Yeah. I think there's a lot of emphasis put on humor especially in Toastmasters. If you're in a speech contest, they'll say you have to have humor. If you don't have humor, you're not going to win. And that might be the case some of the time. That's just the context of what we're in. But you also have to rely on your humor. I always go back to a story I had one time when I was a new Toastmaster. This was probably 2010. I was living in Ohio, and I saw this one lady did a presentation. She had been to the semifinals and finals a couple times. It was an amazing presentation. It was one of those first times I'd seen somebody speak and went, oh, I want to be that person. So I went up to her afterward and I said, I want to speak just like you. I want to be you. And she goes, you can't. You would look horrible in this dress. And what that told me and what the lesson I learned was you got to develop your own approach. You have to develop your own voice when it comes to humor, when it comes to drama, when it comes to storytelling, when it comes to just presentations. You have to have your own voice. So when it comes to humor, if you're not the kind of person who makes a lot of jokes, if you struggle to come up with jokes and make people laugh, you can try to uncover some, but I wouldn't push it, because it's hard to stand in front of an audience and go, I'm going to tell this joke and they're going to laugh. And you say the joke and everybody goes, what? So if you are the kind of person who tells jokes, I would say, because I do that all the time, I have all kinds of really horrible grown-worthy dad humor that I'll include in the rough draft. And it's just full of jokes. And then I go, okay, let me pull this back a little bit, because nobody likes to hear 45 dad jokes. And you leave just the one joke with the monkey butts, and then everybody's okay. But you gotta learn where that threshold is. So I would say it's part of learning your voice. Learn what is comfortable for you. Learn where you can start pushing the envelope a little bit. If you want to be humorous, I would say go find some stand-up comedians that you really like and respect. Find jokes that you find funny. Find presentation styles that you find funny, and try it out. It's okay to like take their comedic bits and just kind of go to Toastmasters and say, I'm going to do this George Carlin thing because I want to see what it feels like. That's okay. That's part of learning. And then you can learn kind of what it feels like to structure a joke, or what it feels like to include it in a presentation. And then you can start developing your own voice that way. So I would say if you want to include more humor, study humor and try it out. But also be cognizant of the fact that if it's just not one of your things, then you might not have it a lot. But you can still make room for it. So I would say, yeah, sure, go for it. But, don't feel the pressure of I have to include 5 jokes a minute or it's not going to be successful. You got to find your voice. That's the way you're going to be successful. Whether you have 2 jokes in your entire presentation or whether you've got nothing but monkey butts, that's the way it's going to be.
So, Joe, I really enjoyed your presentation, and I can't resist this. In our Sergeant at Arms session, I shared the turning wheel. And if you were to have a workshop, you can gamify it by having role playing, and then each person would get their turn on the wheel. And then you could have a role play, like here it's you, who wants to be the you in the story. Yep. And then you would remove that from the wheel and then continue until you fill all the roles. I think that would be a really great idea. And I also really appreciate the way you intuitively related the opposites on the axis of your wheel, and also the horizontal and vertical definition. I think that's really great, the way you had that set up.
Yeah, thank you very much. That wheel thing is a really good idea. I hadn't thought about that. I've done some story selling workshops where I say, like, okay, you start off the story and somebody else will take the next piece and somebody else will take the next piece. What that usually shows is, for people, they have to think on their feet. So that's part of it, the part of speaking, but they also have to think how they can relate to what somebody just said and how they can tie that thread or change it if they need to. And that gives them different ways of thinking about storytelling. But I think this is a great way of getting this structure as well. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I couldn't resist that, though. We just got through discussing that in our session.
That was a good one.
Yeah. I've got another question from the audience if we have time. Joe, please give us your opinion on the biggest mistakes Toastmaster speakers make with their stories, and what can they do to fix it?
That's a deep question. And I think that depends on who you're talking to. A lot of times what I will see are people who take a sales approach to storytelling. They have a goal that they want to meet. They define what that goal is, and then they say, let me find a story to fit that goal. And a lot of times, for my ears, that sounds forced. Like, oh yeah, it's like watching a commercial. You know what's going to happen. It's not exciting. It might have some jokes in it, but it's not fun. For me, storytelling is uncovering truth. It's like the character going into the need stage and saying, I want to have, like, I might want to talk about a particular topic, but then as I'm working with a character, I realize, no, it's not about that. It's about this other thing. And so the story changes and I have to follow the characters to wherever they go. A lot of times you can see these people who are clearly telling stories that either never happened or were so convoluted or constructed that it's just not believable. And it's very easy to go down that path. I have a story. I've done that in some of my speeches where I'm like, it'd be really cool if I could mirror the end of the speech with the beginning and have this action happen and this action. And as soon as I do that, I get all kinds of people going, that's a bunch of bullshit. That didn't happen. I'm like, yeah, you're right. It didn't happen. So then I have to go back and be honest about it. And I think if people can be honest about what their stories are and where they're going, that's going to be more of a revelation for them. But it's also harder to do because it's very easy to say, I'm writing with the end in mind and saying, I know I want to get here, so it has to go there. And then you force it to go there and then you're done. And it can be engaging for some audiences. But if you want to have a really good story, you got to let the story go where it's going to go. And sometimes it goes in weird places. So I would say that's the biggest one that I have. The other thing that I would say is there's too much detail. There's too much. People get really caught up on their ability to describe things or their ability to have a dialogue that they really fall in love with that just doesn't serve the story. And that's where I think the but and the therefore come in, because if you can't have a but or a therefore around what you're doing, it doesn't need to be there. It just does not need to be there. So if you have 5 paragraphs of description about what the room looks like, you cut out 4.5 of them and you're probably okay. And if you have this action that happens that doesn't make any sense, cut it out. I find myself cutting out way more of what I've written than what I keep. I read Kurt Vonnegut was talking about, he used to teach writing, and he was talking about what he does in editing. He'll write his rough draft, and then his second draft will be 2/3 of that. So he's cutting out 1/3 of his story. And then the final draft will be 2/3 of that. So he's cutting out almost half of what he wrote every time he writes a book to get it down to the point where it's engaging and makes sense. And I think that's a lesson that I would try to include in my life, because my rough drafts are, like, my first rough draft of all my international speech contests is like 20 minutes long. So you can't have that. But that's a good question. Thank you.
Yeah. And I know I see the red for timer, but I don't think we have any more time, but I do want to tell you there's some fantastic comments in the chat about how great your presentation was, Joe. Thank you.
The sloppy first copy. I like that, Elaine. That's funny. Yeah, that's a lesson. That's a lesson that I learned from, of all people, Sylvester Stallone. He wrote, he's written several movies. He was a writer before he was an actor. He wrote Rocky in like a week. And one of the things he said is, so many people get caught up in making it important and doing it correctly, doing it perfectly. He's like, I just sit down and write it. Like, just write it. It doesn't matter if it's perfect. Just get it on paper, and then you can figure it out from there. That, for me, that is it. Your first draft is going to suck. Your second draft is going to suck. Maybe about the 9th or 10th draft is where it's going to be good. So you got to get through all the suck before you can get to the good part. So the sloppy first copy, I like that approach.
Great job, Joe. Thank you so much for sharing your time. We know how busy you are. Oh, Janice has her hand raised.
Uh-oh. Do we have time?
No. It's not a question. I'm sorry. I hit the wrong thing. Actually, I wanted to give applause on Joe.
All right. Let's give Joe, a round of applause. Thank you, Joe. Fantastic.
Thank you.